I'd like to welcome everyone to our office hours for Thursday, October 27th. I'm Sam Malkin, and today we're going to be taking some time to delve into the Foreign Supplier Verification Program and the rules around that have been kind of implemented as part of the Food Safety Modernization Act. We're going to have Kim Bukowski, who is a Senior Extension Associate in our Dairy Foods Extension Program, kind of giving us a short presentation on what the rule means, a little bit about some of the issues that we're seeing in the field as FDA has started inspections against the FSVP rule. We're also going to have a great panel of experts here to answer questions afterwards. We've got Dr. Elizabeth Bin, who is a Senior Extension Associate, right, and the Director for the Institute for Food Safety at Cornell. We've got Aliosa Trimick, who is an Extension Associate here in our Dairy Foods Extension Program. We've got Dr. Martin Weidman, who's the Gellert Family Professor of Food Safety. We've also got myself. I'm an Assistant Professor of Dairy Fermentations with a specialty on food safety. And then we also have Melanie Newman joining us, who is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Matrix Sciences International. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Kim to start talking a little bit about, give us that overview on FSVP.
All right, can you see my screen okay?
Looks great.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to talk about Foreign Supplier Verification Program and just do a quick overview of the requirements. And then I have a couple examples of people that are starting to get some inspections and what's been happening with that. So we'll start with the purpose of the rule is to ensure that the safety of the food imported into the U.S. meets the FDA regulations. So basically, they want to make sure that any food imported is going to follow the preventive controls or produce safety, and so that it's safe for people to eat. We talk about some definitions for the foreign supplier rule. The first one is the foreign supplier itself is the company that's manufacturing or processing the food, raising the animals, or growing the food that's being exported into the U.S. So they're the foreign supplier. The importer, for these purposes, is the U.S. owner or consignee of the article of food. And I think one of the things that was really important when this rule was made is that it has to be a U.S. company that is the importer. And then we have qualified individuals, and those are the persons who have the education and training to perform any of the activities related to this rule. And that typically is more than one person. It would be a qualified individual at the foreign suppliers operation that's overseeing everything they're doing as far as food safety goes. And then you would also want to have a qualified individual with the importer who can then verify that all the activities are being taken place to protect the food and have some knowledge on the rule and how that needs to be monitored. So when we talk about what foods are covered by FSVP, it applies to all human and animal food that are offered for import into the U.S. and intended for consumption in the U.S. There are some exemptions, and those include imported in for research, personal consumption, if it's transshipped through the U.S. or imported for further processing and then exported back out, it's exempt. And also if it's produced in the U.S. and then exported, those would be exemptions. Certain meat, poultry, and egg products are also exempt if they're under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So they would not be included in this. When we talk about low acid canned foods, the importer of the low acid canned foods, if they're following the LACF regulations, then it would not be covered for their microbial hazards, but they would need to follow the FSVP requirements for any other hazards, whether, chemical or foreign material type things. Foods complying with the FDA HACCP rule also are exempt. So juice and seafood, they have their own HACCP rules that they follow. And also those ingredients that are being manufactured and imported in related to FDA HACCP rules for juice or seafood. If the US importer is a processor who imports ingredients, then it would fall under the PC rule, and then that would fall under the supply chain provisions of the PC rule. So if a US importer is subject to or in compliance with the supply chain provisions of the preventive control rules, then the importer is deemed to be in compliance. What's important, though, is that that facility must still identify itself as the importer, and in the Customs and Border Protection entry filing, they need to file that they are the importer, but that they're covering the hazards with the PC rule. So the standard requirements for a foreign supplier verification program starts with conducting a hazard analysis to identify any of the foreseeable biological, chemical, or physical hazards for that food being imported. Then also evaluate and approving of each of the foreign suppliers, determining what the foreign supplier verification activities are necessary and the frequency. Also taking corrective actions based on those verification activities, so that needs to be identified. Reevaluating the foreign supplier program whenever they become aware of a food safety problem, or at least every 3 years at a minimum. And then identifying the foreign supplier verification program importer at entry. So who is importing the product and responsible for overseeing this program, and then all the documentation and records that are related to this program. So the first step is to evaluate and approve the foreign suppliers. So the importers must evaluate each foreign supplier's performance, and that includes their processes and procedures for ensuring food safety, and also their history of compliance. Make sure that they haven't had any issues in the past. Then those importers must approve each foreign supplier and have written procedures to ensure the use of that supplier. You are allowed to use an unapproved supplier on a temporary basis, but generally you want to only use your approved suppliers. So you have to come up with verification activities on how you're going to ensure that the hazards are being controlled. So you want to do that before you import any product from the importer. The verification activities are required for all the hazards. You have to identify what the controls are going to be. And then the importers must determine not only the appropriate verification activities, but the frequency that those need to be done. So when we're talking about what verification activities can be, at a minimum, an audit should be done when you first determine you're going to use a foreign supplier. And those audits can either be done by an outside consultant or by the company that's importing into the US. The audits cannot be done by the actual foreign supplier themselves, which only makes sense. You wouldn't want them to be auditing themselves. You may determine that you want to have some sampling and testing done of the products, and so that's a verification activity. You also would want to be able to review the foreign supplier's records that demonstrate the production of safe food. When I think about that, I think about, the critical control point or preventive controls related records to those that you want to be able to see and look at and determine that they're doing them when they're supposed to. And then the verification activities, any other appropriate verification activities that you think would be important for that particular food. The importer must ensure that those activities are performed properly. And if the importer determines that its foreign supplier is not producing food in a safe manner to meet the US safety standards and basically following the preventive controls, then the importer must document and correct any of those deficiencies. So you would have to ensure that your foreign supplier is doing some type of corrective action. And I have an example of that a little bit later on. So the regular and for cause reevaluation would be if the importer must regularly reevaluate their hazard analysis and their foreign supplier performance every 3 years, unless there was a food safety problem, and then it should be done at that time. And of course, we always have records. So creating and maintaining records. So all the documentation that's required by the Foreign Supplier Verification Rule must be complete, must be kept at least 2 years, and must be made available to FDA upon request. And this piece was kind of interesting to me when I was learning about all this, because of the fact that these are companies from outside the US. The records probably won't be in English. So your qualified individual either has to be able to translate it, or you may have to hire a translator. And then those records, when they're supplied to FDA, they may need to be translated too. So that's something to think about because of the fact that you're dealing with countries outside of the US. As far as importers are accountable, but you can rely on others. So they can hire, an importer can hire a consultant, but they have to make sure their consultant is qualified. And they may have an individual themselves on staff that's qualified. I think what I'm seeing is that a lot of these importers aren't normally manufacturers of food. So they may not have somebody on their staff that understands the food safety regulations, understands HACCP and those types of things. And so they either need to hire a consultant that's qualified, or figure out how they're going to do that. And then the importer also should have someone on staff that's overseeing all these food safety parameters for their product. And once again, like I mentioned earlier, the only catch to this is that they can't do their own audits. When we talk about corrective actions, the appropriate corrective actions will depend on the circumstances, and that could include discontinuing use of that foreign supplier or another suitable alternative. The corrective actions must be documented, because when FDA comes in, they're going to want to see, what the corrective actions were done and how that was handled. So here's some examples we're starting to see come through that people are getting warning letters. This one was a brokerage company that was importing paprika chips, corn puffs, some pasteurized white cheese, feta. And they ended up with a warning letter because they had not developed a program at all. And so, here they're importing these products and they don't even have a program in place. The next one I have is for peppers and tomatoes, same situation. This is one where they didn't even have a program. So they got a warning letter that they needed to get a program put together. This third one's a little bit more interesting. This company, once again, a brokerage company, they had a program in place. They were importing all these different teas, but they did not conduct a hazard analysis. What they basically had done is they had taken a couple of the people at their brokerage firm and got them trained in FSVP, but they hadn't done any type of hazard analysis on the foods. And some of them, had walnuts and almonds in them. So they hadn't identified that there were allergens. And so they got written up for that. And then also mycotoxins and peanuts and tree nuts also weren't identified because they didn't really have a good hazard analysis. What I also thought was interesting is this company hired a third-party person to go over and do an audit, and the audit report was available and basically said that it was observed there was a failure to establish standards for cleaning and disinfection at the facility. There was insufficient refrigerator temperatures weren't taken, and there was a lack of understanding of concepts and procedures for a hazard analysis, which makes sense when you see the fact that they hadn't identified some of the hazards at the beginning of this sheet. So, and then no corrective actions were taken in response to these significant deficiencies. What was also interesting is that the consultant that they sent to do the audit had no training records or qualifications available. So they couldn't even prove that he or she was a qualified individual to be able to do the actual audit. One of the things about the way this is the law is written is that if you get a warning letter or they find that you're not handling the program properly or don't have a program in place, they can actually detain the products that you're importing from coming into the US and not allow you to receive those products. So as far as identifying as an importer, if you are one, you need to file with the US Customs and Border Protection entry system. And for that, you need to provide your foreign supplier verification name, your electronic mail address, and then you need a unique facility identifier that goes on the form. And they're using the DUNS number for that. So if your company doesn't have a DUNS number, you would have to apply for one through Dun & Bradstreet. I think what's really important about this program is that you communicate well with your foreign supplier, the importer. You need to sit down, and everyone in the foreign supplier and importer chain needs to communicate about their individual roles, who's going to do what, how often is it going to be done, and how are the records going to be provided for everybody to have. Also, who is the qualified individual for the importer and the exporter? And like I say, that generally is two different people. And do you have proof of training of those people? Is it available? And then if there's any problems, what are the corrective actions? Is it documented how you're going to handle that? And then overall, just having the documentation available that shows that you've done your due diligence with these foreign suppliers and that you feel secure in the fact that they're making a safe food that meets the FDA requirements to bring that into the country. So that pretty much covers the basics for the foreign supplier rule. And if anyone has any questions or comments?
Yeah, let's open it up to the audience.